Let me tell you something that no one in Washington wants to admit. America is not afraid of war, oil prices, or elections. Right now, in 2025, what keeps the power players up at night is one word: India. You're not hearing this on CNN. You're not reading this in the New York Times. But behind closed doors, there's a rising panic because India's growth, not just in economics, but in influence, innovation, and independence, is the biggest threat to American dominance since the Cold War. And here's the part they really don't want you to know. This isn't some potential future. It's already happening. Right now, while everyone's distracted. In the next few minutes, I'm going to break down exactly what's changed, why the U.S. can't stop it, and why you need to understand this shift. Because if you don't, you're missing the biggest power transformation of our lifetime. By the end of this talk, you won't just know why America's terrified. You'll understand why India's rise isn't just inevitable, it's unstoppable. There's a saying in diplomacy: the loudest power isn't always the most dangerous. It's the quiet one making moves while others are distracted. That's exactly what India has been doing for the last decade. And here in 2025, the shift has become undeniable. Let's be clear. The U.S. doesn't fear India in a traditional military sense. This isn't about nuclear weapons, aircraft carriers, or tanks. No, what's creating unease inside the Pentagon, Capitol Hill, and Silicon Valley boardrooms is far more subtle, far more strategic, and far more permanent. India is shifting global power dynamics, not through confrontation, but through competence. Not with threats, but with progress. 1. Global influence without the noise. Unlike China's aggressive posturing or Russia's overt hostility, India is taking a quieter, more collaborative approach to global dominance. And that's exactly what makes it so effective. The U.S. is used to spotting and reacting to direct threats. It's good at war, at sanctions, at pressuring governments into submission. But India doesn't play by those rules. It doesn't need to. India is building relationships on every continent: Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East. Not by flexing military might, but by investing in infrastructure, digital services, and healthcare. Where the U.S. sees geopolitical chessboards, India sees economic bridges. This isn't just smart diplomacy, it's disruptive diplomacy. And it's working. 2. The rise of brand India. For decades, Make in India was a slogan. Now it's a strategy. In 2025, India is no longer just the back office of the world. It's becoming the brain trust, with Apple, Tesla, and Google expanding operations across Indian states, and Indian CEOs heading some of the world's largest corporations, from Microsoft to IBM to Adobe. The brand of India has shifted from outsourced to indispensable. This is a power flex the U.S. didn't see coming, not through war games or trade wars, but through talent, efficiency, and innovation. India is no longer just supplying coders, it's exporting leaders, ideas, and culture. 3. Strategic non-alignment, a new form of power. One of the reasons the U.S. is uncomfortable: India refuses to play on anyone's team. During the Cold War, you had to choose U.S. or USSR. Now, nations are trying to force a similar binary with China and the West. But India's response? We'll partner with everyone and be owned by no one. India trades with Russia, collaborates with the U.S., negotiates with China, and leads the global South, all at the same time. This level of independence, strategic non-alignment too, gives India a unique kind of soft power that's nearly impossible for the U.S. to control, contain, or predict. That unpredictability is what's keeping Western policymakers on edge. Because if India doesn't need the U.S., it can't be leveraged. And if it can't be leveraged, it's truly powerful. 4. Digital leadership and the global South, perhaps one of the biggest shifts no one saw coming. India's role as the digital mentor of the developing world. While the West is busy debating AI ethics and battling tech monopolies, India is exporting entire digital ecosystems, from UPI, its real-time payments platform, to Aadhaar, its digital ID system, to open-source government platforms that are transforming governance in Africa and Southeast Asia. India isn't just growing, it's leading. And that leadership isn't pointed at the G7 or NATO. It's directed at the global South, the 5+ billion people who will define the next century. That's where the future lies. That's where the U.S. influence is fading, and that's exactly where India is planting its flag. 5. The U.S. knows what happens next. History is full of warnings. When a new power rises, slowly, steadily, and silently, it's usually the most dangerous to the existing order. The British Empire didn't collapse overnight, neither did the Roman Empire. It happened through quiet erosion, through new powers filling in the gaps, while the dominant one looked the other way. India's rise is not loud, it's not explosive, it's methodical, cooperative, and deeply intelligent. And that's exactly why it's terrifying, because it cannot be stopped without risking full-blown global instability. The U.S. can't sanction India, it can't invade, it can't isolate. Every option risks backfiring. So what does America do? It watches, worries, and waits. The power shift is happening not in dramatic headlines, but in quiet boardrooms, trade agreements, digital infrastructure, and global hearts and minds. America isn't afraid of India's tanks. It's afraid of India's traction. That's what this keynote is about. Because the future isn't being fought, it's being built. And India is holding the blueprint. When people think of innovation, they picture Silicon Valley, the glass-walled offices, the hoodie-wearing CEOs, the flashy tech launches. But here's what no one in America wants to say out loud. The real future of tech is being written thousands of miles away in India. It's no longer a question of if India will become a technological superpower. That moment has already passed. The new question is this: how will the world, especially the United States, adjust to a reality where India isn't just contributing to global innovation, but leading it? Because that's exactly what's happening in 2025. And it's sending quiet shockwaves through the heart of American industry. 1. From coders to creators, the talent evolution for decades, India's global tech reputation was tied to outsourcing. Armies of engineers working behind the scenes, writing code for American corporations. But in 2025, that story has evolved dramatically. India is no longer just producing coders, it's producing creators, founders, researchers, and thought leaders in AI, robotics, biotech, and quantum computing. Indian universities like the Indian Institutes of Technology, IIETs, Indian Institutes of Science, Education, and Research, IISers, and newer AI-femixed institutes are generating world-class talent that no longer needs to go to the U.S. for opportunity. The opportunity is right at home. This is what's rattling Silicon Valley, because the brain drain that used to benefit the U.S. is reversing. Top-tier talent is staying in India, building Indian companies, solving Indian problems, and scaling them globally. 2. The AI revolution is not American anymore. Artificial intelligence isn't just the next big thing. It's the thing. It's redefining industries, politics, healthcare, warfare, and education. And India? It's not just participating, it's setting standards. With massive investments in open source AI, Indian firms are building large language models in native Indian languages. expanding access to rural populations, and applying AI to agriculture, government services, and micro-enterprise in ways that Silicon Valley has never considered. And here's the kicker. Indian AI isn't just for India. It's for the world. The US focuses on monetizing AI through ads, SaaS platforms, and enterprise automation. India's approach is different. Open innovation, public digital goods, and inclusivity. That scares American tech giants because it's not just competition, it's a different value system. 3. Startup surge and unicorn storm in 2025. India boasts over 130 plus unicorns. Startups valued at over $1 billion, 0 cents, and the number is climbing. But it's not just about quantity. The quality of innovation is what's stunning global investors. Startups like Razorpay and PhonePe redefining fintech infrastructure, Zerodha challenging traditional investing models, Encore Games and Dream11 shaping the Indian gaming ecosystem, Ola Electric and AAI in Indian languages are proving that innovation in India is not about copying the West. It's about creating for India and exporting to the world. And here's why the US is paying attention. For the first time, Indian startups are scaling faster, more efficiently, and more profitably than many American counterparts. Indian VCs are playing the long game, and the results are starting to show. 4. Digital public infrastructure. The game changer, while Silicon Valley is busy building private platforms and paywalled systems, India has gone in a totally different direction, creating digital public infrastructure, DPI. Think of UPI, Unified Payments Interface, that now processes more transactions daily than Visa and MasterCard in the US combined. It's fast, free, and available to anyone with a phone, not a credit score. Or Aadhaar, a biometric ID system covering over 1.3 billion people, enabling seamless access to banking, subsidies, healthcare, and more. India's tech model is decentralized, inclusive, and open source, and developing countries are adopting it by the dozen. This isn't just innovation, this is infrastructure-level transformation, and Silicon Valley has no answer for it. 5. Big tech's Indian infiltration. Don't be fooled. American tech giants know what's happening. That's why they're trying to get ahead of it. Google is investing heavily in India's AI startups. Amazon is pouring billions into Indian cloud services. Microsoft is doubling down on partnerships with Indian universities and government programs. But here's the uncomfortable truth. They're not leading anymore. They're trying to catch up. In the past, the US used to build first and others followed. Now India builds and America watches with growing unease. India's rise in tech isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It doesn't look like Silicon Valley, but that's the point. It's native, it's necessary, and it's next. And the US knows, deep down, that if it doesn't adapt to this new innovation map, it's going to fall behind. Not in theory, in practice. This isn't about rivalry, it's about reality. And India is coding the future. Line by line. Let's get one thing straight. India isn't aligning with the West, and it's not siding with the East either. That's exactly what makes it so powerful and so unsettling to the United States. In 2025, the biggest shift in global politics isn't happening in a war zone or inside a G7 summit. It's happening in quiet bilateral meetings, multilateral platforms like BRICS Plus, and high-stakes diplomatic deals where India shows up, listens, and makes decisions entirely on its own terms. This is strategic independence, and it's disrupting a world order that for decades has been built on the assumption that countries must pick a side. 1. The end of the binary world. For most of modern history, global politics was a zero-sum game. During the Cold War, it was the US versus the USSR. After that, it became the US versus China. You were either with one superpower or you were against it. India, it's tearing that playbook up. Slowly, strategically, and confidently. It trades oil with Russia without blinking. It signs tech deals with the US while refusing to back Western sanctions. It strengthens economic ties with the Gulf states while maintaining historic links with Iran. It builds railways in Africa, invests in Latin America, partners with Israel, and engages with China, all without taking orders from any global bloc. This is what makes policymakers in Washington nervous. Because for the first time, here's a nation with real power that refuses to be anyone's pawn, and the West can't control, predict, or pressure it. 2. Posture via policy. What makes India different? Let's compare for a second. China plays the global power game with aggression, military buildup in the South China Sea, economic coercion through Belt and Road, diplomatic bullying. It's confrontational, loud, and easy for the West to rally against. But India? India plays with influence, not intimidation. It doesn't threaten, it persuades. It doesn't impose, it negotiates. This softer, quieter form of diplomacy is actually far more effective in today's multipolar world. Nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are tired of being lectured by the West. They want partners, not patrons. And India is stepping in as the alternative power that doesn't come with strings attached. America sees this happening, and it knows that influence, not missiles, is the new measure of control. That's why India's diplomacy, which seems so non-aggressive on the surface, is triggering unease beneath it. 3. From BRICS to Bharat, the rise of Southern leadership, India has taken on a new role in the global South, not just as a voice, but as a leader. The BRICS alliance, once seen as a loose collective, is now expanding into BRICS Plus, and India's position within it is gaining weight. Unlike China, which often dominates such forums, India is emerging as the moderating force, the one trusted to bridge East and West, North and South. And it's not stopping there. In climate negotiations, trade debates, vaccine diplomacy, and digital infrastructure development, India is speaking up not just for itself, but for entire regions of emerging economies that have long felt sidelined. This makes India uniquely valuable, but also uniquely threatening to U.S. soft power. The Global South no longer sees America as its primary model. Increasingly, it's looking to India. 4. Defense without dependence. Here's another reason the U.S. is quietly unsettled. India is building one of the world's most powerful militaries, but it refuses to be part of any formal military alliance. Despite pressure, India has not joined NATO-style frameworks. It's part of the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia, but it operates independently within it. It buys Russian S-400 missile systems while conducting joint military exercises with US forces. This makes India impossible to classify and impossible to control. Washington prefers allies it can rely on for support in future conflicts. India's made it clear it'll defend its interests, not yours. And that's exactly the kind of sovereign posture that scares superpowers, because you can't pull the strings on a country that holds its own playbook. 5. Diplomacy for a new era. India isn't trying to replace America. That's what makes its rise so effective. It's not chasing headlines or global dominance. It's building quiet credibility. One trade deal, one infrastructure project, one climate agreement at a time. But here's the real shift. Other countries are starting to notice. Small nations no longer need to bend to the IMF or bow to the World Bank to survive. India is offering new financial structures, development support, and digital frameworks that empower rather than in debt. This isn't just new diplomacy. It's disruptive diplomacy, and it's threatening the legacy systems America has used to project influence for decades. In a world built on alliances, India's refusal to be boxed in is its greatest strength, and its most terrifying trait, at least to the US, because India's rise isn't about taking sides. It's about changing the very shape of the table. And when you change the table, you change the game. There's a quiet revolution happening in global economics, and it's not powered by AI, energy, or even technology. It's powered by people. And India has them in numbers the United States can only dream of. In 2025, India's population isn't just the largest in the world. It's the youngest, the fastest growing, and arguably the most strategically positioned to take over the global economy. And this isn't demographic theory. It's already shaping reality. Let's break down why India's human capital is more than just a statistic, why it's a super weapon that's forcing the United States to rethink its long-term position in the global order. 1. India's youth versus America's aging workforce. Look at the numbers. The median age in India is 28. The median age in the US is 39 and rising. In Japan, it's over 48. In Europe, similar. In China, aging faster than expected. What this means is simple. India is young, energetic, and full of potential, while many Western nations are facing a demographic cliff. This youth isn't just about numbers, it's about momentum. Every year, millions of educated, ambitious Indians enter the workforce, ready to contribute, innovate, and lead. The US, by contrast, is scrambling to find skilled workers and fill labor gaps, especially in STEM, healthcare, and infrastructure. In the global economy, youth is power, and India holds that power in both hands. 2. The world's largest talent engine, India, now produces more engineers, IT professionals, and scientists than any other country on Earth, and not just in volume, but increasingly. In 2025, India's IITs, NITs, and private universities are collaborating with global tech giants and foreign institutions. Thousands of Indian students who once migrated for opportunity are choosing to stay or return because the opportunity is now in India. Global companies are no longer outsourcing to India. They're headquartering in India to be closer to the talent. The US once dominated the global talent market by attracting the best minds from around the world. Now it's losing that edge, and India is the one taking it. 3. A consumer market that also builds. Here's what makes India uniquely dangerous to the US economy. It's both a massive market and a massive manufacturer. That means India's 1.4 plus billion people represent an enormous consumer base, with a growing middle class that is tech-savvy, digitally active, and brand-aware. At the same time, the same population is highly productive, driving a surge in Indian manufacturing, tech, clean energy, and service exports. This dual power, consumption and creation, is what makes India so strategically positioned to rise. China once held this balance, but it's now battling demographic decline, global distrust, and economic slowdowns. The US, it has the consumption, but increasingly lacks the youthful, cost-effective labor to compete with India's production. 4. Digital-first, mobile-native generations India's youth aren't just young. They're born into a digital ecosystem designed for growth. With the explosive success of Aadhaar, UPI, DigiLocker, and other government-led digital services, young Indians have access to a modern, mobile-first economy unlike anything in the West. They're starting businesses with a smartphone, they're accessing credit through fintech, they're building apps for rural users and AI tools for global markets. This is a generation that doesn't wait. It builds. And it builds fast. American youth, in contrast, are saddled with debt, distracted by cultural disillusionment, and less connected to high-growth sectors unless they enter elite circles. India's youth, they're hungry and organized. 5. the rise of youth influence on global culture and ideas. This isn't just about labor. It's about culture. India's young population is not only working, it's shaping narratives. From Bollywood's global crossover to Indian creators dominating YouTube to Indian entrepreneurs headlining Davos and tech conferences, India's voice is rising. And it's a youthful voice, confident, globally aware, but deeply rooted in Indian identity. This soft power, this cultural export of ambition and optimism is becoming contagious, giving young people around the world, especially in the global South, a new model of success, not Western, but Indian. The US isn't just losing talent, it's losing influence. 6, the economic domino effect. Let's zoom out. A young, skilled, digital, natural population leads to more innovation, more startups, more consumption, more GDP, more global influence. Every one of these elements is now tipping in India's favor, and Washington knows once this momentum compounds, there's no catching up. America's aging workforce and immigration gridlock mean it can't replicate India's demographic engine. Not in 5 years, not in 20. And that's terrifying. For decades, India was seen as the back office of the world, a cost-saving hub for customer service, software development, and tech support. It was efficient, it was dependable, but it was never seen as a serious threat to Western innovation. That perception? Dead in 2025. India is no longer imitating Silicon Valley. It's replacing the blueprint altogether. The US, especially its business elite, is quietly terrified. Because what they're seeing isn't just competition. They're seeing a new kind of capitalism. Leaner, more inclusive, less extractive, and unapologetically Indian. And it's winning. 1. India's frugal innovation is outperforming big tech bloat. In Silicon Valley, success often comes dressed in excess. Billion-dollar valuations, VC-funded burn rates, endless rounds of fundraising, and bloated teams. In India, the startup culture is built on frugality, discipline, and profitability from day one. This is called Jugaad innovation, the art of doing more with less. And it's not just cultural, it's competitive. Take examples like Zerodha, a brokerage platform that scaled to millions with no external funding. Zoho, a SaaS giant built quietly from a small town in Tamil Nadu, now a global player. Kuku FM, ShareChat, and Meesho, built for Bharat, non-urban India, not the West. These companies don't follow the Western path of growth at all costs. They focus on real problems, real users, real value, and they grow organically. That's terrifying for traditional American firms because they've never had to compete with companies that don't burn cash to win. 2, build for Bharat greater than build for the West. Here's the secret sauce. Indian companies aren't just cloning Western models anymore. They're inventing new ones for India's unique needs. And these models are proving so effective, they're being exported globally. Think about it. Fintech models like UPI are now being studied by the US Fed. Telemedicine platforms built for rural India are now being adopted in Africa. E-commerce systems like Meesho, which run without warehousing and enable local sellers, are being copied in Southeast Asia. What's the implication? India is creating globally relevant solutions by solving local problems. And those problems, digital identity, financial inclusion, small business scaling, exist everywhere. Meanwhile, US startups are still chasing ad revenue and subscription fatigue. The world is watching India not for its labor anymore, but for leadership in innovation. 3, profit with purpose. A new entrepreneurial ethos. The Indian startup ecosystem isn't just focused on valuation. Increasingly, it's focused on impact. You see a generation of founders creating products to educate first-gen learners through regional language edtech, help farmers access market prices via AI-powered agritech, solve urban infrastructure issues like sanitation, traffic, and waste. In this century, Power isn't just about armies or nukes. It's about people. And India has the world's largest, youngest, and fastest moving force of human capital on the planet. The US isn't just watching a population boom. It's watching a population advantage turn into an economic revolution. And there's no policy, no trade deal, and no defense pact that can stop it. This isn't just corporate social responsibility, it's business strategy. The American model of move fast and break things is giving way to India's move fast and fix things. And investors? They're paying attention. Venture capital in India is now flowing into social impact plus profitability models, a combination Silicon Valley has long struggled to achieve. That shift isn't just philosophical, it's structural. 4, digital infrastructure as a foundation, not a product. In the US, most tech innovation is built for private gain. Every product is a platform, every service behind a paywall. In India, the biggest tech revolutions are public digital infrastructures. Aadhaar for identity, EPI for payments, OnDC for open digital commerce, DigiLocker, eSanjeevani, and more. These aren't apps. These are national utilities, open source and accessible to all. This means Indian startups don't have to build basic infrastructure. It's already there. They can build on top of it, fast, at scale, with minimal friction. The US doesn't have this backbone. Every app has to reinvent the wheel. Every company builds in silos. India's stack is collaborative, modular, and designed for scale, a business dream. 5, reverse brain drain equals reverse power shift. Perhaps the biggest warning sign for the US is what's happening with talent. 10 years ago, India's best and brightest left for Silicon Valley. Today, they're coming back, not just because of better salaries or lifestyle, but because the entrepreneurial energy in India is hotter than in California. There's more freedom to build, more relevance, more momentum. And those who stay abroad, they're launching India ventures from abroad, tapping into the India market while building globally. This means the global Indian founder is now more loyal to India's growth story than America's. The US is waking up to this and realizing it may not have another generation of Indian founders to absorb into its system. They're building their own systems now. In 2025, power no longer wears a Western suit and speaks in polished English from Washington or London. Power now looks different. It sounds different. It thinks differently. And nowhere is this transformation more visible or more profound than in India. For the first time in modern history, India is not just rising economically or militarily, it's rising in the most subtle and dangerous way to traditional superpowers. It's reshaping the global narrative. It's rebranding what modern power looks like. And it's doing it without asking for permission. Let's break down why this shift. This identity revolution is making America quietly anxious. 1. From periphery to protagonist. For decades, India was the potential story, the country with promise, the market of the future, the emerging economy in development reports. But in 2025, India is no longer playing supporting character to the West's global narrative. It's become the protagonist, speaking at global forums with authority, not deference, leading climate negotiations, hosting summits, shaping BRICS plus priorities, calling out hypocrisy in trade deals and geopolitics. India now sets its own tone, its own expectations, and its own vocabulary of power. America is used to allies, not equals, and certainly not equals with centuries-old civilizations, independent agendas, and massive global sway. Cultural confidence at a global scale. What makes India's rise even more unique is how unapologetically rooted in Indian culture it is. This isn't a copycat rise. India isn't trying to become the next America or replicate China's rise. It's embracing its own voice, loud and clear. From Bollywood to streaming platforms, Indian stories, language, and music are gaining global fans. Indian cuisine, yoga, Ayurveda, and traditional clothing are no longer exotic. They're cool, modern, mainstream. Indian philosophies on sustainability, family, dharma, duty, and community are influencing new global models of balance in work, climate, and business. This cultural assertion isn't a soft flex. It's a direct challenge to the West's dominance in shaping the world's values and aspirations. And for America, long used to being the global tastemaker, this shift is deeply unsettling. 3. India is not brand America. And that's the point. In the 20th century, success was modeled on the American dream. In the 21st century, India is modeling a new dream. It's not built on consumerism or hyper-individualism. It's a model that balances technology with tradition, capitalism with conscience, and ambition with spirituality. India's global identity doesn't revolve around dominance. It revolves around pluralism, resilience, and pride in complexity. This makes India unpredictable and uncontrollable from a Western perspective, because it refuses to define success in the language of Wall Street, NATO, or Silicon Valley. This is power that can't be co-opted. This is identity that can't be branded or bought. And for America, that's deeply frustrating. 4. Soft power redefined America once ruled the world not through force, but through Hollywood, Nike, Coca-Cola, and Harvard. That kind of soft power, built on glamour and aspiration, is starting to decline in influence. Why? Because the global South doesn't want to be told what to wear, eat, or think anymore. It wants representation, respect, relevance. India is giving that. Not through dominance, but through relatability. Indian influencers on YouTube and Instagram are reshaping content across Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Indian writers, developers, and thinkers are shaping Web3, AI ethics, and digital public goods. Indian movies and musicians are building massive audiences without the Western machine. This is grassroots soft power, and it's redefining what global influence looks like. And America, it's realizing it's no longer the center of the cultural solar system. 5. Post-colonial confidence. The West can't digest it. Perhaps the most radical part of India's identity shift is its post-colonial confidence. India isn't just rising, it's doing so while calling out the colonial legacy that once tried to erase it. It's saying, we are not grateful to join the table, we built our own. It's questioning institutions like the UN and World Bank that still reflect outdated power dynamics. It's asserting its civilizational history without apology. It's refusing to bend to Western narratives of morality, policy, or history. This form of self-assured power, especially from a former colony, makes legacy powers uncomfortable, because the unspoken global rule was, you can rise, but only if you play by our rules. India is rewriting the rules altogether. 6. India is becoming the voice of the global majority. The final, and perhaps most powerful shift, is that India is increasingly being seen as the representative of the global majority. The young, the non-Western, the post-colonial, the digitally native, the climate conscious but development hungry. India's story is their story, and when India speaks, it speaks not just for itself, but for billions. That terrifies America. Not because India is a threat in the traditional sense, but because India is a mirror reflecting a world where the West is no longer the default, but just one of many players. In 2025, India is not just a country. It's an idea that power can be inclusive, that tradition and modernity can coexist, and that greatness doesn't need to look Western to be legitimate. That idea is spreading, it's resonating, and it's reshaping the entire world order. And that, more than trade, more than tech, more than troops, is what truly keeps America up at night. India's new business model isn't about mimicking the West. It's about creating a new global standard, one that values purpose over profit, scale with soul, and innovation rooted in local needs. The scary part? It's working. And while the US is still playing the same old game, India's rewriting the rules. Not louder, not flashier, just smarter.